I always knew I could recognize from far away the smell of old track mixed with rust. In the past few months, that scent became almost like a refuge for me, a rough kind of hug that reminded me of long work hours and sleepless nights. My name's Ryan Turner. I'm 28, and I spend most of my time alone, taking care of railroad tracks that cut through small towns and forgotten fields. They say that if you work in this line of work, you end up with calloused hands. But what no one talks about is that loneliness also leaves its scars, invisible but deep. Life just swallowed everything after I ended my last relationship. The apartment turned into nothing more than a storage room full of silence and rumpled clothes. My phone rang less and less, and conversations were reduced to short, distracted messages, with no promises of meeting up again. One day, after an especially heavy week, I grabbed my backpack, filled it with some clothes, and decided to disappear for a while. I chose a hotel in some random little town, one of those places that hardly shows up on the map, just to see if the world felt less squeezed when no one was watching. Now, lying on a bed with rough sheets, with the distant sound of a train echoing. Outside, I think about how strange it is trying to find peace when your head is at war. And if you've made it this far, maybe you're also looking for some answers. Don't forget to like and subscribe because, honestly, the story I'm about to tell could never have been made up. It just happened. The hotel where I stayed was one of those old mansions made of red bricks, kind of hidden among tall pine trees and a shy little lake. The stone parking lot made a unique noise every time someone arrived, as if the ground was complaining about the footsteps. I walked into the lobby and was greeted by a receptionist reading an old newspaper, completely indifferent to my presence. The smell of the place was a mix of waxed wood and coffee brewed hours ago, and there was a yellowish light that gave everything an old movie vibe. My room was on the second floor, facing the lake. The window was big, with heavy curtains, and I soon realized that you could see the sun setting behind the trees. The silence was so thick that I could hear my blood running through my veins. I dropped my backpack on the floor and stayed there for a while, just listening to the muffled sound of ducks on the lake and, every now and then, the distant whistle of a train. It felt weird not having someone waiting for me. No message blinking. On my phone, nothing urgent to fix. On the first day, I tried to clear my head with simple things. I walked along the trails behind the hotel, letting my boots sink into the damp earth. The air smelled like pine and dry leaves, and the chilly breeze hit my face like a reminder that I was far from the city, far from any kind of commitment. I got back to the hotel before dark, took a hot shower, and sat on the bed, listening to the wood creak under my feet. I thought about going out to explore, but laziness won out. I turned on the TV, but nothing grabbed my attention. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and couldn't find anyone to call. That isolation was both comforting and punishing at the same time. Deep down, that loneliness had a bitter taste, but it was also a silent invitation for something to change. I just didn't know what. I was almost asleep when I heard rapid knocks on the door. The sound cut through the silence abruptly, making me jump up in bed, my heart pounding like crazy. I hesitated before opening. I wasn't expecting any visitors, didn't know anyone there. When I turned the doorknob, I was met by 3 guys standing in the corridor, each one so different from the other, it almost looked staged. The first was Carter, his face marked, beard neatly trimmed, broad shoulders and a deep voice that sounded both commanding and inviting. He looked like the oldest, maybe around 34, and had that kind of air that came from always being in charge. Next to him was Dylan, a bit shorter, with messy brown hair and an uneasy look, like he was always about to crack a joke or get into trouble. He was probably about 26, but his easy smile and animated gestures showed he hadn't lost that light-hearted vibe that makes him believe everything can be fun. Finally, there was Noah, a bit older than Dylan, around 30, with a calm face, deep, almost sad eyes that seemed to see through everything without needing words. Carter apologized for the time, explaining they were looking for a friend who had gotten lost in the hotel. They said they'd been staying in the room next door and that, by mistake, someone might have entered my room thinking it was theirs. Dylan laughed at the mix-up and joked about how hard it was to find your way around. In a small-town hotel, Noah kept to himself, but he wouldn't take his eyes off my hands, which were still trembling a little from the scare. The conversation, which started off a bit clumsily, soon flowed naturally. Carter asked where I was from. Dylan wanted to know what brought me to such a quiet place. And Noah just listened closely, as if he were deciphering a secret. I found out they were also from Chicago. They were there for a family baptism, but had taken the opportunity to escape the chaos of the big city. They joked about the hotel's calm, about the thin walls and the sound of the ducks on the lake serving as a soundtrack. I started laughing and relaxing, letting the tension slip away, until an invitation to grab a beer in the hotel's common area came up so naturally, I couldn't say no. So, in the middle of what was supposed to be just another night, I found myself part of a conversation where strangers felt like old friends lost in time. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, my head still heavy but my chest lighter than it had been in days. When I went down for breakfast, I found the three of them sitting together, laughing out loud at some inside joke. Dylan motioned for me to join them. The table was piled with breads, fruits, hot coffee, and remnants of laughter. I sat awkwardly at first, but soon felt welcomed. Carter said he was going to walk on the trail around the lake and asked me to come along. Noah had brought a map of the area, pointing out interesting spots to check out. Dylan, always upbeat, suggested renting the old boat from the hotel and cruising on the lake. I ended up saying yes to everything without question, as if it were natural to be part of that group, even though I didn't really know them well. Paddling on the lake turned out to be one of the funniest experiences of the trip. The boat rocked, the water was freezing, and with every misdirected paddle, Dylan would make up a different story about sea monsters or hidden treasures. Carter laughed and corrected our strokes, never losing that protective vibe. Noah sat quietly, watching everything, but when he spoke, everyone listened. The conversations ranged from trivial topics to personal stories, from childhood memories to plans for the future. On the way back, we improvised a little picnic on the hotel lawn. Carter opened a bottle of wine he'd brought from the city. Noah shared a packet of cookies like he'd been saving them for a special occasion, and Dylan grabbed my phone to play some old tunes. Slowly, the ice began to break. They asked about my work, the cities I'd passed through, what it was like living alone most of the time. We laughed about stories of stalled trains, rough moments on the road, and the strange situations only someone who works on the road can understand. By the end of the afternoon, we returned tired but satisfied. The mood was light, as if that friendship had been born right there, without any effort. I realized that, even without grand gestures, we were building something rare, a true connection made up of little kindnesses, knowing looks, and a desire to be together. No rush, no obligations. For the first time in a long while, I felt I could just be myself, without filters, without fear of judgment. But it wasn't all laughter and easy talks. Amid that lightness, the first cracks began to show, almost imperceptible but real. During one of the jokes, Carter let slip that he was also there to run away from a responsibility he didn't want to face at home. His protective nature, which had always seemed so natural, now showed signs of weariness, as if carrying the world was just routine. Dylan, always the playful one, sometimes went quiet suddenly, staring off into space, lost in thoughts that no one else could reach. In one of those silences, he mentioned that he'd been unemployed for months and that humor was his shield against anxiety. Noah, on the other hand, was the hardest to read. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried a lot of meaning. One night, during a chat by the lake, he admitted he had just ended a relationship, and that since then, he was scared to get attached again. His usually distant look grew even more intense, and I realized there was a pain there I knew all too well. As for me, I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it was to feel part of something while still keeping one foot in loneliness. I'd always been reserved, distrustful, scared to open up and end up hurt. All the while, a thought kept pounding in my head. Do they really want my company, or is it just friendliness for the sake of a trip? Am I just a background extra in a temporary friendship, doomed to vanish as soon as everyone returns to their own life? It was on one of these nights, while we were laughing by the hotel's makeshift fireplace, that we heard a voice coming down the corridor. A guest was complaining about the noise, and a hotel staff member came by asking for silence, her look mixing curiosity and disapproval. The mood shifted. Suddenly, I felt the weight of judgment. that feeling of not quite fitting in anywhere. Carter became serious, Dylan shrugged his shoulders, and Noah looked away. The sense of belonging, which had felt so solid until then, was replaced by a quiet discomfort. That night, each of us went to our own room early. I lay there on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling my chest tighten, like I was about to lose something I wasn't even sure I'd ever truly held on to. The fear of showing yourself and getting rejected came back hard, and I realized that maybe the biggest obstacle was me, with all my insecurities and that constant need to be accepted, to belong, to not be alone. Night fell softly, bringing with it a cold breeze that made the trees around the hotel whisper secrets. After dinner, I spent some time walking alone in the hallway, trying to shake off the uneasiness left by the previous night. But as I passed the door to the threes room, I heard a quiet laugh followed by Dylan calling out, "Ryan, come on in, we're waiting for you." I went in without hesitation. The room was lit only by a yellow lamp, shadows stretching along the walls as if guarding the promise of something new. Carter was sitting on the floor, leaning against the bed, wearing an expression of tiredness, mixed with a serenity hard to describe. Noah was flipping through a book, but as soon as he saw me, he closed it and gave me a little sideways smile. Dylan was lying across the bed, his feet swinging in the air, fiddling with a box of worn cards. "Wanna play something?" Dylan asked, showing the cards. I sat down on the floor with them and accepted a glass of red wine that Carter handed me. The first few minutes were pure relaxation. Jokes, teasing, little bets. The alcohol slowly loosened everyone up, dissolving the last barriers of awkwardness. Carter turned out even more charismatic, telling stories about his work and his spontaneous trips. Dylan, full of energy, joked about everything, even his own bad luck at the game. Noah, always the quiet one, watched everything with that attentive look, but now with a new lightness on his face. Little by little, the game lost its meaning. The cards forgotten on the bedspread. The wine ran out, but none of us seemed to notice. We stayed there, sitting close together, talking about dreams, frustrations, secrets we'd never told anyone. Carter talked about his fear of disappointing his family, of not being strong enough. Dylan confessed that sometimes he felt like he was always on the outside, never really belonging. Noah, with a shy smile, said he no longer knew how to trust after all the disappointments, but that tonight he finally felt at peace. The mood began to shift, growing electric, as if every gesture was taking on a new meaning. Noah moved closer, first. He sat right next to me, so close I could feel the warmth of his skin, the subtle scent of soap mixed with wine. He looked into my eyes, unhurried, and whispered, "Can I?" His hand touching mine was gentle, almost shy, yet direct, as if he understood that words weren't needed when silence said it all. For a moment, I felt time slow down. The room seemed to breathe along with us. Carter, who until then had just been watching, came up behind me and rested his hands on my shoulders in a protective, almost paternal gesture. Dylan, who had been lying there, slowly got up and sat facing me, smiling that mischievous smile that always made me laugh. The atmosphere was one of discovery, as if we were about to cross an invisible line. My skin felt electric. Every movement, every look, every soft laugh was a silent invitation. The warmth in the room was rising, not because of the wine, but because of the closeness of our bodies, of the pent-up desire that built up with every second. Dylan ran his fingers over my arm, absent-mindedly, as if exploring new territory. Carter gently squeezed my shoulders, massaging slowly to send out calm vibes. Noah, still holding my hand, rested his head on my shoulder, taking a deep breath. It was as if all the fear from the night before had evaporated. Here, there was no judgment, only acceptance. The touches were gentle, the gestures slow, as if we were rediscovering what intimacy really meant. Not something rushed or urgent, but the building of a bridge between loners. I realized I was smiling without meaning to, feeling a warmth that came not from outside, but from within. The desire was there, pulsing, but there was no hurry. Time seemed to stand still, and each of us allowed ourselves to be seen, touched, desired. The room, which had only served as shelter from the cold before, became a haven of truths. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like running away. Silence settled in, heavy, as if the whole world had stopped to watch us. Noah was the first to move again, running his fingers along my face, his eyes fixed on mine as if he wanted to memorize every detail. His touch was light, almost like a whisper on my skin, and it made me close my eyes for a moment, feeling life pulse a little differently in those few seconds. Carter moved closer, wrapping me in a firm hug from behind, his broad chest pressed against my back, giving me security but also an intense warmth, like a shield against all the cold in the world. I could feel his hands slowly glide along my arms, exploring, getting to know me. The smell of wood and wine that he gave off pulled me even deeper into that moment. Dylan turned his body, sitting in front of me with his legs crossed, and looked at me with that grin that said he was about to get into mischief. He ran his hands over my knees, slowly moving higher, exploring every inch like he was drawing invisible maps. His touch was different, a little playful but full of contained desire, as if every gesture posed a question and answered it at the same time. The room filled with a new, dense, vibrant energy. It wasn't just desire. It was a mix of tenderness, curiosity, and an almost childlike eagerness to discover one another. Our bodies moved closer, first slowly, then with more confidence, like we were learning the choreography of an old secret. Noah's hands wandered over my chest, drawing slow paths, while Carter pulled me even closer, his warmth wrapping me like a coat on a chilly night. Dylan, with his face pressed against mine, whispered little provocations, joking but also revealing, deep in his eyes, a sincere desire. With every touch, it felt like my skin was lighting up in waves. The warmth of the hands, the brushing of lips, the exchange of looks. It was all intense, but never rushed. Carter gently laid me down on the bedspread, his eyes focused on me, both caring and wanting at the same time. Noah lay down next to me, his legs entwined with mine, our breaths mixing together, our hearts pounding hard against each other. Dylan lay down on the other side, his fingers running through my hair, whispering words that tickled the soul. It was a moment when everything blended together, the desire, the tenderness, the acceptance. There was no room for shame, only for letting go. Every touch was a promise of care, every kiss a new discovery. Carter explored my body with confident hands, both firm and gentle at once, like someone shaping something precious. Noah got lost in the details, as if he wanted to keep every sensation in his memory. Dylan alternated between laughter and soft sighs, making everything feel lighter, more real. The room suddenly felt too small for all that emotion. The warmth of our bodies, the exchange of tenderness, the pleasure of being seen and desired completely, it was overwhelming. None of us spoke loudly, but the silence was packed with meaning. Our kisses tasted of wine, of discovery, of freedom. Our hands traced new paths, revealing secrets, building memories. Time seemed to stretch out, and for one moment, the world outside just stopped existing. The intensity of that encounter wasn't just in the desire, but in the care, the gentle gestures, the shared looks that said, "You're safe here." The pleasure wasn't only physical, it was emotional too. A relief, a celebration, a reunion with parts of ourselves we'd long forgotten out of fear or shame. When, finally, the pace slowed down, we all lay there side by side, our bodies tangled together, breathing slowly. The room was warm, the sheets, all rumpled, and the silence was only broken by the sound of our satisfied, deep breaths. Carter pulled me even closer. Noah looked at me tenderly, and Dylan laid his head on my chest, smiling for no particular reason. In that moment, I knew I wasn't the same anymore. Something had changed, and there was no turning back. The sun started to rise, shyly filtering golden light through the curtain's gaps. The clock on the wall was almost 6 in the morning, but no one seemed willing to break the magic of that instant. We stayed silent for a while, just listening to the world outside coming back to life, the birds singing, the distant sound of a car passing by, the creak of some furniture in the hall. Carter was the first to get up, slowly putting on his shirt, moving as if he didn't want to end that early morning spell. He looked at me and smiled sincerely, as if he understood the weight and lightness of what we'd just experienced. "You okay?" he asked, his deep voice full of care. I just nodded, feeling my chest warm as if I was being reborn. Dylan got up next, tousling his hair and laughing quietly at some memory. "I think I'll never forget this night," he said, grabbing his phone and taking a picture of us. Just our intertwined hands. Nothing that someone not there could really understand. Noah, still laying in bed, pulled me close for a strong hug. "Thanks," he whispered, as if I'd done something huge for him without even realizing. But reality soon knocked on the door, literally. A hotel staff member appeared, gently knocking, and asking for silence. She said that some guests had complained about the noise from last night. Carter stepped forward, apologized, and closed the door calmly. The message was clear. Our space of freedom had its limits. The real world, with its rules and judgments, wouldn't be far behind. The mood changed. Noah grew quiet, staring at the floor. Dylan made a joke trying to ease the tension, but his laugh sounded a bit forced. Carter became serious, his eyes roaming around by the window. I felt a tightness in my chest, as if that magical night was about to dissolve like a bubble on the verge of bursting. The fear came back along with doubts. Had they seen us? Would someone comment? Would things ever go back to the way they were? We stayed in silence for a while, each of us dealing with our own ghosts. Finally, Carter spoke. "We didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to apologize for being who I am." Noah nodded silently, his eyes glistening with emotion. Dylan, ever the light one, suggested we go grab a coffee together, as if nothing had happened. And for the first time, I felt like I could take a deep breath and accept what had happened, without guilt, without fear. At that breakfast, sitting together, exchanging knowing looks and shy smiles, I realized we were different. The bond that had formed that night wasn't just about desire, but trust, acceptance. Each of us had dropped a mask, shown a vulnerability, allowed the other to see past the surface. The experience didn't erase our fears, but it gave us the courage to face them together. As the morning went on, each of us went our own way. Carter went to make a phone call, Dylan headed out for a walk, and Noah stayed with me on the balcony, silently just feeling the sun on his face. What remained of that night was more than a memory. It was the certainty that, despite the world outside, inside we'd found something rare. In that moment, I realized I no longer had to hide. I could be seen, desired, loved just the way I am. And even though I still felt fear of judgment, it wasn't strong enough to silence me. Because that night, I understood that when truth is shared, it becomes a shelter. And together, we were stronger than any disapproving glance. The rest of the day passed slowly, as if time had gotten lazy after everything we'd lived through that night. It wasn't a wine hangover. It was an emotional hangover. A good kind, of tired, like after a long, unexpected plunge into deep waters. Each of us, in our own way, sought a quiet place to breathe and process it all. Carter left early for a walk around the lake, hands in his pockets and eyes fixed on the horizon, as if searching for answers that only silence could give. Dylan disappeared for a while, then reappeared in the hotel's common area, lying on an old sofa, listening to music with his eyes closed and a small smile on his face. Noah stayed locked in his room for a long time, lying on his side, staring at the wall, while I, unable to sit still, headed to the deck to watch the movement of the water and the ducks. I sat alone, watching the sky's reflection on the lake, and let my mind wander. At first, doubts crept in. Did I give myself away too quickly? Did they feel the same way? Or was it just another travel experience, like one of those little hotel secrets that later fade away? But slowly, the fear made room for another feeling, stronger and truer. I didn't regret a thing. In fact, I was proud of myself for letting myself live, for not running away, for finally lowering my guard. I thought about everything I'd carried with me until then. The loneliness of my days, the fear of not being accepted, the failed attempts to fit my life into what others expected. For so long, I was an expert at hiding. I always thought it was easier to give up on desire than to face the risk of being judged. With those guys by my side, for the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend or negotiate with my truth. There, I was seen, desired, embraced. And more importantly, I let them show themselves too, without masks. What happened between us wasn't just a meeting of bodies, it was a meeting of lives. Carter, with his protective nature, finally relaxed. I could see relief in his eyes, as if someone had taken a weight off his shoulders. Dylan, behind the jokes and humor, showed an unexpected sweetness, a need to be accepted without having to try too hard. Noah, always so quiet, opened up to me in silences full of meaning, in touches, in lingering looks, in shy smiles. After breakfast, we went back to the deck, the four of us together, and this time, the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was full of companionship. Carter spoke little, but every word he said was loaded with intention. Dylan leaned against my shoulder, laughing about something only he understood. Noah held my hand slowly, as if saying the world could wait. Sitting there, I felt the calm of someone who found shelter, even if it was temporary, even in an unlikely place. I remembered the nights when I'd preferred loneliness over the risk of being rejected, the times I hid from the world, the empty conversations I had just to avoid, silence. And I realized that even though all that had been a part of me, it no longer had to be my only path. That night's experience changed me, not just because of the pleasure, but because it showed me that I could be accepted, not in spite of who I am, but exactly because of it. In their eyes, I saw the same fear, the same courage, the same desire to live without apologizing. Each of us came to that encounter with a heavy load of doubts and insecurities, but together, we managed to lighten that load a little. Later that afternoon, Carter suggested a walk around the city. We strolled slowly, exploring narrow streets and colorful houses, laughing for no apparent reason, sharing stories that only made sense to those who had lived something so intense in such a short time. The curious looks from the locals didn't bother us. For the first time, I felt like I could walk with my head held high, without having to hide anything, without needing to apologize for who I was. On the way back to the hotel, we stopped under a huge tree. Carter looked me in the eyes and said, in his calm, deep voice, "Life's too short to hide." Dylan made a joke as usual, but this time there was a different sparkle in his eyes, a pride in having been a part of it. Noah just smiled, squeezing my hand tightly. When night came again, we knew the weekend was coming to an end. The mood was one of farewell, but not sadness. There was hope, a feeling of having accomplished something, of a page turned. Carter talked about wanting to keep in touch, of not letting it all become just a distant memory. Dylan suggested a group chat, and Noah promised he'd make sure we met up again. At that final dinner, sitting together, I looked at them and silently thanked them, not only for what we'd experienced, but for showing me that life can be so much more than fear and routine. When we said our goodbyes that night, there weren't any grand promises, just the certainty that somehow we'd remain connected. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the next day. I felt the urge to live, really live, without holding back. Today, looking back, I realized that weekend was more than just an escape from routine. It was an invitation to be honest with myself, to accept that life is made up of these unlikely encounters, these small acts of courage, these risks that we almost never dare to take. I went back home with the feeling that something inside me had changed forever. In the silence of my room, back to my old life, I thought a lot about everything I'd lived with Carter, Dylan, and Noah. It wasn't just my body that missed them, it was my heart. I missed the conversations, the laughs, the way each of them helped me see a new piece of myself. I missed the lightness, the freedom, that sense of belonging I'd thought I'd never experience. Slowly, I realized I didn't have to leave it all behind. We kept in touch, exchanging messages, confidences, memories. Sometimes, just a good morning was enough to remind me that opening up had been worth it. Carter continued to be a safe harbor, sending me messages when I least expected it, always checking if I was okay. Dylan, with his humor, filled the group with funny videos and absurd stories. Noah, more understated, shared songs, little quotes, and small details from his day that made me smile. The experience we had together taught me about tenderness, about the power of a touch, about how true intimacy isn't about rushing or perfection. I learned that desire is only a part of what can grow between people who are willing to really see each other. Sometimes, The greatest act of courage is to let yourself be vulnerable. To show your scars, your fears, your wishes. It took a while, but I understood that I didn't have to live in fear anymore. The disapproving looks of others, the opinions of those who've never walked in my shoes. All of that lost its power compared to the truth I'd lived in that hotel room. Sure, the judgment of the real world exists, but it isn't stronger than my right to be who I am, to seek joy, to love in ways that make sense to me. Little by little, I carried that courage into other parts of my life. At work, I started talking more about myself, not hiding so much. With old friends, I made room for honest conversations without fearing the loss of those who weren't ready to accept me. I learned to look at myself in the mirror with more kindness, to recognize that even with all my faults, I deserve to be happy. Not tomorrow, but now. Today, when I think back on that night, I don't just remember the pleasure, the warmth, the desire. I remember the care, the acceptance, the freedom. I think about the sincere hugs, the knowing smiles, the silent promise that no matter what happens, I'll never hide again. And if you've read this far, maybe you know what it's like to be scared of being yourself. Maybe you long to live something like this, but you're still trapped in your own doubts. I want you to know it's worth the risk. It's worth opening up, letting yourself be seen by people who truly get you. Because when you find that kind of connection, everything changes. Life bursts into color, meaning, and courage. That was my story, or rather, the beginning of it. Because as long as there's courage, there'll always be a new chapter waiting to be written.